In this video, I'll demonstrate how to work with Nano Server. Nano Server is a headless operating system. And what this means is that there is no local interface. There's no way to directly interact with it locally using a keyboard or a mouse. So instead, we would use remote management tools, whether they be graphically based or command line based, such as PowerShell. PowerShell DSC, or desired state configuration, can be used to configure one or many Nano servers from a script. PowerShell desired state configuration lets us centrally configure things like file system settings, registry settings, roles, and features, and have that applied to remote hosts. But we don't install Nano Server by booting from the product media as we would to install Server 2016 with or without a local GUI. Instead, on the Server 2016 DVD, you're going to find a Nano Server folder. And in there, you'll see a nanoserver.wim, a Windows image file. There's also a packages folder, and we could apply these packages, either none, some, or all, to our Windows image using either a script or the command line dism.exe tool. On the Microsoft TechNet gallery, we've got a couple of scripts that we can use to convert that WIM file for Nano Server to a VHD. Then we could easily create a virtual machine to get our Nano Server up and running. The first script is called convert-windowsimage.ps1. The second one is called new-nano server VHD ps1. So you can download these, put them into the same folder, and you can execute the new Nano Server VHD script. Now, it expects command line parameters, such as the location of the server ISO for Server 2016, because it needs to reach into it to grab the Nano Server WIM. It's also got to know where you want to create your destination VHD file, from which you will then create a virtual machine. We can supply a computer name for Nano, an administrator password. We can tell it any packages we want applied at deployment time, and we can assign it a static IP address if we choose. This is important because we need to be able to connect to our Nano deployment immediately so we can further configure it, maybe to join it to an Active Directory domain or to install additional server roles and features. Here in HyperV Manager, I've already got a Nano Server virtual machine running, so I'll double click on it to open up the console so that we can interact with it. Except we can't interact with it. It's Nano Server. So we have nothing to work with locally when we look at the console. So instead we manage it remotely, for example, using PowerShell. But before we do that, we should consider using the set-item commandlet to make sure we add either the IP address or host name of our new Nano Server so that it's considered trusted and we can connect to it with PowerShell remoting. Now, connecting through PowerShell remoting can be done at the command line. For example, I could type enter -ps session, and then I would follow that with the name of the host, in this case, nano-1. And my server is joining the domain, so I don't need to add the -credential command line switch here. So I'll just go ahead and press enter. And after a moment, I'll be connected to my Nano Server. So this means then, of course, that a WinRM endpoint for PowerShell remoting is automatically enabled with brand new Nano Server deployments. Okay, looks like we're in. So just for kicks, maybe we'll run get-command and pipe that to measure. This way, we'll get some kind of a sense as to how many PowerShell commandlets are currently available in Nano as of Technical Preview 2. And it's reporting back 676, so not bad. Now, that's subject to change, of course, before Nano Server is released to market. Now, the PowerShell that runs on Nano Server, though, isn't the normal PowerShell that we're used to that sits atop the .NET framework. Instead, Nano Server uses what Microsoft is calling Core PowerShell. And this is based on the core CLR instead of the more bloated .NET framework. There are less APIs. And one of the reasons for that is because we wouldn't need APIs related to the graphical desktop environment because it doesn't exist on Nano Server. Now, for developers that are using Visual Studio, they'll be able to use a Nano Server template, and then they'll be able to gauge which APIs are available for them to call on the Nano Server. Also, developers using Visual Studio can remotely debug code running on Nano Server. Nano Server is designed to be a very small operating system with very small overhead. This means less patching. It also means a smaller attack surface. The ultimate goal with Server 2016 set forth by Microsoft is, to have a maximum of approximately 2 reboots per year. So the less stuff that we have installed, the more that possibility becomes a reality. Additionally, there's no longer a side-by-side folder when you install any variation of Server 2016, including Nano. So that when we go to install server roles and features, we're going to have to specify a source that it can get the files from. But this is a good thing because it now means that when we deploy Server 2016, whether it's physical or virtual, it's going to take less time. It's not consuming as much space as it did, let's say, with Server 2012 R2 deployments. Let's exit out of our remote PowerShell session. Now, we can also use Server Manager so that we can manage servers through the GUI environment, including Nano. Now, we can go to the Manage menu in Server Manager where we can choose to add servers. So we can connect through the DNS name of the host or the IP address, or if our Nano server has been joined to Active Directory, we can search through Active Directory and simply add it from here. So now that I've added my Nano server here, it shows up under All Servers. And I can see, in fact, that it is Nano because it's got Tuva at the end of the operating system version. And Tuva was the code name previously for Nano Server. Now, that's opposed to the other two Server 2016 hosts added here that do not have Tuva. They are servers that have either just the local command line available or, like the one we're sitting at right now, they have the full GUI installed as well, which means it takes more overhead. Other than Server Manager itself, I might also use other tools to remotely connect to my Nano server to manage it. For example, here in the Server Manager Tools menu, I'll go down and I'll choose the Windows Event Viewer where we can work with logs. Currently, it's looking at the logs on the local host. However, I can right-click, choose Connect to another computer, and here I'll specify our Nano server. And we can now see that we are connected to our Nano installation, so we could expand it, take a look at the logs on that host, and so on. Now, at the command line in PowerShell, we have a number of other things we can do. We can map drive letters to our Nano server if we need to get to the file system and work with it. And also, interestingly, we could copy files using this or using Windows Explorer. But what if we've got Nano servers in the cloud? Using Windows Explorer to copy files and mapping drives might be more of an issue due to firewall restrictions and so on. So instead, what we can do is we can use PowerShell remoting to copy files around. Let's start by setting up a PowerShell session variable. I'm going to call it S, and I'm going to use new-ps session. And all I'm going to specify here is the computer name of Nano-1. I don't have to specify the -credential parameter since it's joined to my Active Directory domain and I'm sitting at a domain computer. Now that that's been done, I can copy files from my local machine to the remote machine through that PowerShell session, or vice versa. It could be copied from the remote machine to local. So I'm going to change into my Documents folder here, where if I do a dir, I've got a file called serverfixes.txt. So that's the file I want to copy through PowerShell remoting to my Nano host. To do that, I'm going to use the copy item commandlet. And I'm going to use the -2 session switch. Now, of course, I have to tell it the session variable, so I've got $S for that. And I'm going to tell it the local file I want to copy is called serverfixes.txt, and I want to dump that, let's say, on the root of drive C on my Nano box. And after a moment, the file will be copied through PowerShell remoting, which is great if you need to talk to cloud-based Nano servers. Now, if we go to our drive mapping letter Y, which is drive C on the Nano server, and do a dir, we indeed can see our server fixes file has been copied to that host. Now, there are a few other things we should be aware of when it comes to Nano. First of all, there is no MSI or Microsoft installer support, and there's also no 32-bit application support. It's exclusively 64-bit. Also, on Nano Server, there is no sconfig tool, as there is with Server 2016 installations without a GUI, although sconfig will be deprecated very soon, probably by release date for Server 2016. In this video, we learned how to work with Nano Server.